Welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive. This time, we're going full 80s, but with a twist.
Ooh, a twist. I like twists.
We're diving deep into the life of, yep, you guessed it, Rick Astley.
The never gonna give you up Rick Astley.
The one and only. But here's the thing. We're going beyond the hits. We've got his autobiography, Never,
Oh, I
and
love when we have memoirs.
me too. You get so much more than just the public image. And with Astley, it's fascinating because you've got this guy who craves stability.
Which makes sense, right? I mean, the music industry.
It's chaos. But what's crazy is that his childhood was anything but stable.
Oh,
Yeah.
wasn't he like the milkman's son or something? Seemed pretty normal.
That's the image, yeah. But the reality, his parents divorced when he was little, 4 years old.
Oh, so young.
And then, get this, he ends up living with his dad and brothers
Okay, not unusual.
in a caravan.
A caravan, like a camper.
Yeah, but not on some fun road trip. They were parked on a garden center lot.
Wow, that's a far cry from suburban stability.
Right. And they lived there for a while. It wasn't temporary. That kind of instability, especially early on, it leaves a mark.
It has to. You'd think it might make someone crave excitement, constantly seeking change.
You'd think so. But with Astley, it seems to have done the opposite. He was almost drawn to the steady, the reliable.
It's like he was subconsciously searching for that solid ground he never had as a kid. And that theme, that need for stability, it pops up a lot in his story.
It does. But what I also find interesting is how his brothers, they grew up in that same environment, that same caravan.
Jim Dad, same chaos.
But they turned out so differently. One brother became an accountant.
The epitome of stability.
Exactly. The other one, well, he was a bit more of a wild card, a bit of a troublemaker even.
Ah, the classic sibling dynamic. Was he the one who put the grass snake in Rick's bed?
That's him, knowing Rick was terrified of snakes.
Oh, that's rough.
Not exactly brotherly love, right?
Yeah.
It makes you wonder, if you were in Astley's shoes growing up like that, would you have sought out that same stability later on?
I mean, it's hard to say, right? We're all products of our experiences, but it definitely makes you think. But for Astley, in the middle of all that craziness, he found his escape in music.
Classic story. Finding solace in art. Did that surprise you, given his background?
Honestly, not really. It's so common, especially for people who feel like outsiders. Music, it becomes a community, a way to speak your truth when words fail.
And he went from listening to playing pretty early on, starting with bands like Give Way. And get this, the name came from a stolen road sign.
Haha, how about that for a little rebellion?
From road signs to the FBI, that was his next band, right? Doing covers mostly.
But Astley wanted more. He had that songwriting itch, and his inspiration, none other than the Smiths.
Big Smiths fan. But there's this hilarious story in the book. He's trying to be all Morrissey-esque with his lyrics.
Morrissey, the king of literary references.
Exactly, and Astley, he completely misinterprets one of them and ends up writing a whole song based on The Taming of the Shrew.
Wait, the Shakespeare play?
The one and only, which, here's the kicker, Astley had never even read.
Oh, that's fantastic. It's a perfect example of how we can be so inspired by artists, even if we completely miss the point sometimes. But that drive to create, it ultimately led him to PWL, the hit factory of Stock, Aitken, and Waterman.
But they weren't interested in his band. They saw solo potential in Astley.
And that's where the story takes a turn, because Saw W, they had a formula, and they knew how to turn raw talent into chart-topping gold.
But his start at PWL, let's just say it wasn't glamorous. He was a tape op, making tea, running errands for the likes of Dead or Alive.
Can you imagine Rick Astley serving tea to Pete Burns? What a picture.
Right, but it shows his humility, his willingness to learn the ropes.
He paid his dues, and there's this great detail in the book about him sneaking off to chat with this guy named Tops, who worked in this little rooftop shed at PWL. Tops later became his manager, but back then, those conversations were like a music business masterclass for Astley.
Imagine getting those insider stories.
Yeah.
But let's talk about Never Gonna Give You Up, the song that made him a global phenomenon.
The song that launched 1,000 memes.
Exactly. But I was shocked to learn that his vocals were actually rejected at first.
Really? For that song?
Stock and Aitken, they weren't convinced his voice was the right fit. But Astley, he believed in the song, kept pushing, and eventually they came around.
It shows his determination, for sure.
Yeah.
But it also makes you wonder, how much creative control did he actually have at that point?
That's a huge question, especially within the PWL system. They had their sound, their vision. It's that age-old tension between artistic expression and commercial success.
And that tension, it's something we're going to keep unpacking as we go deeper into his journey. But for now, let's switch gears and talk about what happened when Never Gonna Give You Up launched him into superstardom. Imagine being 21 and suddenly,
Your life explodes.
it's a level of fame most of us can't even fathom. But the way Astley describes it, it wasn't all glitz and glamour.
About this really poignant moment, his debut on Top of the Pops. He's surrounded by these polished pop stars, and he just feels like an outsider.
Really? I wouldn't have pictured that.
He says he was longing for a familiar northern accent in a sea of southerners.
It's that feeling we've all had, right? Feeling out of place, like you don't quite belong.
Exactly. It's so relatable, even if we haven't experienced fame on that scale. And knowing what we know about Astley's desire for stability, how do you think you would handle that kind of instant, overwhelming attention?
It's a fascinating thought experiment. That kind of fame, especially that young, it has to have a huge psychological impact. And for Astley, it seems to have amplified his need for normalcy. But unfortunately, his relationship with his girlfriend, Debbie, it couldn't withstand the pressure of his newfound fame.
It's the classic story of success coming at a personal cost. That spotlight shines so brightly on your professional life, your personal life ends up in the shadows. And for Astley, that yearning for normalcy, it ultimately led him to make some pretty bold decisions, even walking away from the success he had with Saw.
I mean, to just walk away. From a team like that, it was a big risk.
It was, especially considering how successful they were together.
Yeah.
But in the book, you get the sense that Astley felt creatively stifled, like he was in a box.
Makes sense. He wanted more control over his music, and that tension with Saw, it eventually just became too much.
And he didn't just leave the label. He basically ghosted everyone, packed his bags, and moved to Denmark.
Denmark. What took him there?
Love. It was to be with Lene, the woman who'd caught his eye years earlier. Talk about a life-changing leap of faith.
Wow, to just drop everything and move across the world. Was it purely romantic, or was there something more to it?
It's hard to say for sure, but I think it was a combination of things. Yeah, the romance was there, definitely. Yeah. But I also think it was about taking control. He achieved so much, but on someone else's terms.
Right, like he was living someone else's dream.
And going to Denmark, it was like creating space for himself, both personally and creatively.
It took guts to walk away from that level of success. So they were a hit-making machine. He could have just ridden that wave forever.
He could have, but he was willing to risk it all to find his own voice. And during that time away, he experimented with different styles, collaborated with some big names, but
it still wasn't quite right.
it wasn't. He still felt like something was missing. It's almost like his PWL experience was playing out again, just in a different form. He was still searching for that true creative autonomy.
That's interesting, that parallel. It makes you think about how hard it is to really have control in the music industry.
Especially when you're working with big names, talented producers, there's always a compromise and negotiation.
Always. And for Astley, that search for creative freedom, it eventually led him to step back from music altogether, at least for a while.
He needed a break. It was during that time that he really focused on his family, his personal life, and he also started going to therapy.
Therapy. Was he struggling with something specific?
He doesn't go into detail in the book, but he talks about how therapy helped him understand his past, helped him find a healthier way of living.
I think a lot of people can relate to that. Seeking therapy not because you're in crisis, but because you want to grow. You want to understand yourself better.
Absolutely. Have you ever had an experience like that? Something that completely shifted your perspective, whether it was therapy or something else?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Life throws you curveballs, and sometimes you need help processing it all, figuring out how to move forward.
Makes sense. And it seems like therapy gave Astley the tools he needed. It helped him understand himself better, which I think paved the way for his eventual return to music.
And what a comeback it was. Years later, he's back, but this time it's completely on his terms.
No more chasing the charts, no more trying to fit into someone else's mold. It was this gradual, organic thing. Small gigs, then touring with Peter Kay, and boom, a #1 album at 50 years old.
It's such an inspiring story. It shows you it's never too late to rediscover what you love and find success doing it your way.
Absolutely. It's a testament to the power of authenticity. He wasn't trying to be anyone but himself, and that resonated with people. But what I find really fascinating is how Astley's story comes full circle. He starts out craving stability as a kid.
Growing up in that caravan.
And then he finds it, but in a way he probably never imagined. He builds this incredible family life with his wife and daughter, and that becomes his anchor.
Like he finally found that solid ground he'd been searching for his whole life.
Exactly. And that stability, it gave him the freedom to approach his music in a whole new way. There was no pressure to replicate past success, no need to meet anyone else's expectations.
He was free to just have fun with it.
Right. He even started this side project with some friends, a band called the Luddites. They do these tongue-in-cheek covers of rock and punk songs.
Oh, I love that. It's like he's embracing his past, but with a wink and a smile.
Totally. And then, of course, there's the whole Rickroll phenomenon.
Oh, yeah, we can't forget about that.
It's wild how that song took on a life of its own in the digital age. And Astley, he's handled it all with such grace and humor. He even performed Never Gonna Give You Up with the Foo Fighters.
I saw that. It was amazing. It's like he's come full circle, embracing the song that defined his early career, but reinterpreting it for a new generation.
And it worked. It speaks to his ability to adapt, to evolve. He's not afraid to poke fun at himself,
Yeah.
and he's willing to roll with the punches.
It's a great quality to have, especially in an industry as unpredictable as music.
So we've covered a lot today, from a childhood in a caravan to global superstardom, from creative struggles to personal triumphs. What stands out to you as the most important takeaway from Astley's story?
It's his resilience, all the setbacks he faced, the ups and downs, but he never gave up on music. He kept pushing, kept evolving, and in the end, he found success on his own terms.
You're right, it's inspiring. He could easily become bitter after PWL, or even after stepping away from music altogether.
Totally, but he didn't. He found a way to make peace with his past, embrace new opportunities.
And that's a powerful message. It's never too late to rediscover your passion, to find your voice, to create something meaningful.
And sometimes that means letting go of what you thought you knew, embracing the unexpected.
Like the Rickroll thing. That could have been a nightmare for him, but he turned it into something positive.
Exactly. He's got a great sense of humor about it all, and that's helped him connect with a whole new generation of fans.
It's a reminder that success doesn't have to come at the expense of joy. You can have both.
Absolutely, and Astley's story proves that. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the life of Rick Astley, what do you hope listeners take away from it?
I hope they're inspired by his resilience, his creativity, his willingness to embrace the unexpected. I hope they see that it's possible to find success and fulfillment on their own terms, no matter their age or background. And most importantly, I hope they're inspired to never give up on what they love, even when things get tough.
Beautifully said. For everyone listening, whether you're a diehard Rick Astley fan or just discovering his music, keep exploring, keep creating, and never be afraid to rewrite your own story.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.